"Where is the third daughter?" the Duke asked, and the world, which had been a muffled roar of music and laughter beyond my hiding place, fell utterly silent. From my prison of shadow and tapestry, I heard my stepmother, Lady Anya, give a laugh that sounded like shattered glass being swept into a velvet bag. It was a sound designed to be charming, but I knew its sharp edges. "Your Grace, you must mean Alara," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness that never failed to curdle my stomach. "Oh, she is a shy thing, a little mouse. She prefers the quiet corners." I pressed my cheek against the rough, dusty weave of the heiress, the ancient depiction of a stag hunt scratching my skin. A quiet corner. That was what she called this forgotten alcove behind the grand ballroom's heaviest drapery. It was not a corner, it was an oubliette, a place to put things one wished to forget. For 18 years, I had been the thing my family wished to forget. My father, Lord Evian, cleared his throat, a nervous, papery sound. "Indeed, Your Grace. She finds large gatherings overwhelming. Her constitution is delicate." Lies, all of it. My constitution was as sturdy as the old oaks in the West Wood. My shyness was not a preference, but a meticulously crafted cage built by years of their casual cruelty. I was not a mouse. I was a ghost, talked to haunt the edges of my own life, silent and unseen. The color of invisibility was a dull, serviceable gray, the very shade of the dress I wore, chosen specifically to blend with dust and shadow. My sisters, Rosalind and Seraphina, were the jewels of our house. Rosalind, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky, was the diamond. Seraphina, dark and sultry, was the ruby. They were out there now, shimmering in the candlelight, their laughter bright, tinkling bells in the grand symphony of the ball. I was the dull pebble in the toe of a shoe, a constant low-grade irritant to be ignored until it could be discarded. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of my family's social ambition. The reclusive Duke Alaric Valerius, a man spoken of in hushed, awed tones, had unexpectedly chosen to attend our annual ball. He was a legend, a figure of immense wealth and power, rarely seen since the tragic death of his younger brother years ago. He was the grand prize, and my stepmother had spent a fortune ensuring her two prized daughters were polished to their highest sheen. I, of course, was part of the tarnish to be hidden away. "Just stay out of sight, Alara," Anya had hissed as we prepared to leave, her fingers pinching my arm with a viper's speed. "Do not for one moment embarrass us with your presence." And so, I had obeyed. I had found the deepest shadow, the most ignorable spot, and I had melted into it, becoming one with the forgotten things. I was tracing the faded thread of a hunter's spear with my finger when the Duke's voice had cut through the din. It was not a loud voice, but it had the quality of absolute authority, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very stone of the floor. It was the voice of a man who was never, ever ignored. Now that voice spoke again, closer this time. "A quiet corner," he mused, and I could feel the subtle shift of air as he moved. The collective breath of the ballroom was still held captive. "Show me." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the dull resignation in my chest. This was not part of the plan. The plan was for me to remain here, a piece of furniture, until the carriages were called. He was not supposed to ask. No one was ever supposed to ask. I was the secret kept in plain sight. I heard the rustle of my stepmother's silk gown, a frantic, agitated sound. "Your Grace, it is truly no trouble. She is perfectly content. Let me fetch you some champagne. Rosalind plays the pianoforte beautifully." "I did not ask for champagne," the Duke said, his voice clipped, impatient. "I asked for the third daughter." There was a terrible, stretched silence. Then the heavy velvet tapestry was swept aside. Light, brilliant and blinding, flooded my sanctuary. I flinched, throwing a hand up to shield my eyes. For a moment, I was just a silhouette, a creature of the dark startled by the sun. When my eyes adjusted, he was there. Duke Alaric Valerius was not handsome in the way of the preening young lords who courted my sisters. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, as if carved from granite. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his eyes, a startling pale gray, were like chips of winter ice. They held no warmth, only a piercing, unnerving intelligence. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, unadorned black that made him seem like a column of shadow against the gilt and glitter of the ball. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt the full, undivided attention of another human being. It was terrifying. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. Behind him, I could see the horrified faces of my father and stepmother. Anya's smile was a frozen, desperate rictus. Rosalind and Serafina stared, their mouths agape, their perfect beauty marred by sheer, uncomprehending shock. The entire ballroom had turned to watch this bizarre tableau. The most powerful man in the kingdom standing before a ghost in a gray dress in a dusty alcove. The Duke's gaze swept over me, from my plain, tightly bound hair to the scuffed toes of my slippers. There was no pity in his expression, no revulsion, only a quiet, unnerving assessment. "Miss Alara," he said. It was a statement, not a question. His voice was even deeper up close, a low rumble that resonated in my bones. I could not find my own voice. It was a dusty, unused thing trapped in my throat. I managed only a small, jerky nod. He extended a gloved hand. "You will grant me the honor of this dance." Again, a statement of fact, not a request. The world tilted on its axis. 1,000 objections screamed in my mind. "I cannot. I am not supposed to be here. My dress is wrong. I will shame you. I will shame them." But my body, long trained in obedience, betrayed me. My hand rose, trembling, and I placed it in his. His grip was firm, cool, and utterly steady. He drew me out of the shadows and into the light. A gasp rippled through the crowd. He led me to the center of the floor, the sea of glittering guests parting before us like the Red Sea before Moses. He was an undeniable force of nature. He placed a hand on my waist, and the orchestra, after a moment of stunned hesitation, began to play a slow, stately waltz. We began to move. I was clumsy at first, my limbs stiff with shock and fear. I kept my eyes fixed on the knot of his cravat, unable to meet that intense, gray gaze. He moved with a fluid, powerful grace that belied his severe demeanor. He held me securely, guiding me through the steps with an unnerving confidence. He did not seem to care that his partner was a trembling, gray sparrow while he was a magnificent eagle. "They told me you were delicate," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. "They are mistaken, Your Grace," I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse. "I know," he replied, and the simple certainty of those two words struck me with more force than a physical blow. How could he know? He had never seen me before tonight. I dared to lift my eyes to his. The coldness was still there, but beneath it, I saw something else. Curiosity, a focused, analytical interest that was somehow more intimidating than any scorn. "Why did you ask for me?" I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. A long moment passed. The music swelled around us. We were the sole occupants of the dance floor, a spectacle for hundreds of eyes. "Because," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. 5 years ago, at a lecture at the Royal Astronomical Society, a young woman in a gray dress asked a question about tidal locking in binary star systems that demonstrated a more profound understanding of celestial mechanics than anyone else in the room, including the lecturer. I have often wondered what became of her. The memory slammed into me. I had been 13, a scrawny, awkward girl my father had reluctantly brought along because my governess was ill. I had been enthralled by the lecture, and the question had simply burst out of me, a product of late nights spent with dusty tomes in our neglected library. I had been harshly admonished by my stepmother afterward for making a spectacle of myself. I had buried the memory under a mountain of shame. He remembered. This man, this duke, this near-mythical figure, had remembered a question asked by a child 5 years ago. The music ended. He held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, then bowed, a crisp, formal gesture. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Alara." He released me and turned, striding from the floor without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone in the center of a silent, staring room. The spell was broken. The whispers started instantly, a sibilant hiss like wildfire catching in dry grass. My stepmother was on me in a second, her fingers digging into my arm like talons. Her face was a mask of pure fury, the charming veneer stripped away. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper as she dragged me from the floor. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing," I stammered, my mind still reeling. "I said nothing." "You little fool, you have ruined everything." She pulled me through a side door and into an empty corridor, her grip merciless. My father followed, his face pale and slack with distress. "Anya, please," he began. "People are watching." "Let them watch," she spat, turning on him. "This is your daughter's fault. This creature. After everything I have done to secure a future for this family, she crawls out of her hole and makes a scene." She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with malice. He was supposed to notice Rosalind. He was supposed to be enchanted. Instead, he asks for you. You did this on purpose. You schemed to embarrass us. The accusation was so ludicrous, so far from the truth of my cowering existence, that I could only stare at her, speechless. I, who had perfected the art of taking up no space, of making no sound, was being accused of orchestrating the most public spectacle of the season. The ride home was a torment of frozen silence. Anya radiated a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. My father stared out the window, a portrait of ineffectual misery. I sat opposite them, my hands clenched in the lap of my gray dress, my mind a maelstrom of confusion and a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. He had seen me, not as a mouse or a ghost, but as a mind. The next morning, a footman in the Valerius livery arrived at our door. He bore a single crisp envelope addressed in a strong black script to Miss Ilara Evian. My stepmother snatched it from the butler's tray before I could even see it. Her hands trembled as she broke the ducal seal. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions: disbelief, fury, and then a chilling, calculating cunning. "He has invited you to tea," she said, her voice flat. "To his residence, this afternoon." My heart gave a painful lurch. "You will go, of course," she continued, her eyes narrowing. "And you will be on your very best behavior. You will be modest and quiet. You will explain to him that your little display last night was a moment of foolishness, that you are not suited for society, and that he would be far better served directing his attentions to your sister Rosalind. Do you understand me, Ilara?" I understood perfectly. I was to be a tool, a stepping stone to deliver the Duke to my sister. I was to extinguish the very quality he had noticed in me and present myself as the worthless creature they had always told me I was. "Yes, stepmother," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. The Duke's townhouse was a formidable structure of gray stone on the city's grandest square, its facade as severe and unadorned as its master. I was met at the door by a housekeeper, a stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Mrs. Gable. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp and observant as she led me through a hall of cool marble and dark wood. Instead of a formal parlor, she showed me into a library, and it was a library that stole my breath away. It was a cathedral of books, 2 stories high, with shelves stretching to a vaulted ceiling painted with the constellations of the night sky. A spiral staircase of wrought iron curled up to a second-level gallery. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax, a scent that was more comforting to me than any perfume. In the center of the room, by a large window overlooking a winter garden, sat the Duke. He rose as I entered. He was dressed simply again, in dark trousers and a white shirt, the formality of the previous night gone. He looked less like a duke and more like a scholar in his natural habitat. "Miss Ilara," he said, his voice that same low rumble. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair opposite his own. Mrs. Gable quietly set a tea service on the table between us, and then departed, closing the heavy oak doors behind her. The silence that fell was not awkward, but companionable, like the quiet of a forest. He poured the tea himself, his movements precise and economical. He handed me a cup. Our fingers brushed for a fleeting second, and a jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm. "I trust your family was not too displeased by the events of last night," he said, his gray eyes watching me over the rim of his cup. I remembered my stepmother's instructions. I was supposed to be demure, to redirect him. But sitting here, in this magnificent room, surrounded by the knowledge of ages, the lie felt profane. The truth, for once, felt easier. "My stepmother believes I orchestrated the entire encounter to deliberately sabotage my sister's prospects," I said, my voice barely a whisper. A corner of his mouth tilted upward, a fractional movement that was not quite a smile, but changed the entire topography of his face. "And did you?" "No, Your Grace. Until you spoke my name, I was under the impression that my primary function in life was to be as unobtrusive as a crack in the floorboards." The almost smile widened. "A crack in the floorboards," he repeated softly. "An interesting assessment." He set his cup down and leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused entirely on me. "That question you asked, about the algol system, you postulated that mass transfer between the binary pair could account for the seeming paradox of the less massive star being more evolved. It was a theory that was, at the time, considered radical. It has since been proven correct." My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't just remembering the question, he remembered the substance of it. I read a paper by a Professor Sterling," I stammered. "It seemed a logical conclusion." "It was a brilliant conclusion for a mind of any age, let alone a 13-year-old girl who was supposed to be admiring the floral arrangements," he said. He stood and walked to one of the towering shelves, pulling down a heavy, leather-bound volume. He brought it back and placed it on the table. It was a first edition of Copernicus's De Revolutionibus Orbium Caelestium, an object of almost impossible rarity and value. "I have been looking for an excuse to discuss this with someone who would appreciate it," he said. "Tell me what you think of his heliocentric model." And so we talked. For 2 hours, we spoke not of society or balls or marriage prospects, but of retrograde motion, of stellar parallax, of the beautiful, cold mathematics that governed the universe. I forgot to be shy. I forgot I was a ghost in a gray dress. In his presence, with his focused attention, I felt solid, real. My mind, so long kept locked away, was allowed to stretch and breathe. It was the most exhilarating experience of my life. When it was time for me to leave, he walked me to the door. "Your stepmother will wish to know the topic of our conversation," he said, his expression unreadable. "You may tell her we discussed the weather." And with that, the ghost of a smile touched his lips again before vanishing. That tea was the first of many meetings. Sometimes they were in his library. Sometimes we would walk in the bare, skeletal beauty of his winter garden. He never once touched on anything personal, never offered a compliment on my appearance, never spoke a word of courtship. Our currency was ideas. He would lend me books, and I would return them with notes scribbled in the margins. He would listen, truly listen, as I spoke of my theories, my questions. He treated my mind as a thing of value, a territory worth exploring. Slowly, I began to change. It was a subtle transformation, an internal blossoming. I held my head a little higher. The perpetual apology in my posture began to straighten. My voice, when I spoke, was a little clearer. My family noticed, of course. My stepmother watched me with a suspicious, hawk-like intensity. She could not forbid the meetings, one did not forbid a duke, but she made her displeasure known in 1,000 small ways. A forgotten place setting at dinner, a misplaced book he had sent, a constant barrage of passive-aggressive comments about my pretensions. Rosalind, to my surprise, was not hostile. She was mostly confused. "What do you and the Duke even talk about?" she asked me one evening, her brow furrowed as she embroidered a silk flower. "He seems so severe." "Stars," I said simply, "and maps." She stared at me as if I had said we discussed the inner workings of a sewer. "Oh," she said, and returned to her needlework, the topic clearly beyond her comprehension. One afternoon, as a cold rain lashed against the library windows, the Duke was unusually quiet. He stared into the fire, a profound sadness etched onto his features, making him look older, more vulnerable. "Is something amiss, Your Grace?" I asked softly. He was silent for a long time. "Today is the anniversary of my brother's death," he said finally, his voice rough. "Leo. He was younger than me, brighter, I think. He was a mountaineer and a cartographer. He loved the unknown places of the world." He looked at me then, and the ice in his gray eyes seemed to have cracked. He saw the world as a series of beautiful, intricate problems to be solved. "Much like you see the night sky." He paused. "He fell. In the Altanian peaks, it was a senseless accident. He was gone, and the world became quieter, less interesting." It was the first time he had ever spoken of himself, of his past. He was sharing his grief with me, a burden he had clearly carried alone for a long time. In that moment, he was not the powerful Duke Valerius. He was just Alaric, a man mourning his brother. "I am so sorry," I whispered, the words wholly inadequate. "He would have liked you," he said, a statement of simple fact. "He would have spent hours arguing with you about the Mercator projection." An impulse, reckless and overwhelming, seized me. I reached out and placed my hand on his, where it rested on the arm of his chair. It was a small, hesitant gesture. He did not pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over and curled his fingers around mine. His skin was warm, his grip strong. We sat there in silence as the fire crackled and the rain fell, my small hand enveloped in his. It was not a gesture of passion, but of a deeper, quieter connection. A meeting of two solitudes. In that moment, the fragile hope I had been so carefully suppressing bloomed into something terrifyingly real. I was beginning to fall in love with him. And that, of course, was when my stepmother decided to destroy it all. She must have sensed the shift. Perhaps it was in the way I carried myself, or perhaps she had spies who reported the length and frequency of my visits. Her ambition, thwarted by the Duke's inexplicable preference, curdled into a venomous obsession. If she could not have him for her daughter, then she would make certain that I could not have him either. Her attack was a masterpiece of cruelty, executed with surgical precision. It began with a letter delivered to the Duke. I only learned of it later, but it was from a concerned physician, a man in her pay, detailing my fragile mental state, my propensity for fantasy and delusion, and suggesting that my intellectual pursuits were a symptom of a deep-seated hysteria. It was designed to paint me as an unstable, unreliable creature, unfit for any serious consideration. Her second strike was aimed directly at me. One morning, she summoned me to her private sitting room. She held a letter in her hand, the ducal seal broken. Her expression was one of false pity. "Elara, my dear," she began, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I am so sorry. It seems your little friendship has run its course." She held out the letter. "This arrived from the Duke." My hands trembled as I took it. The script was a passable imitation of his. The words were brutal. It spoke of his amusement at my intellectual posturing, but that such a novelty had worn thin. It stated that he had no further use for our conversations and wished me well in finding a husband more suited to my station. It was a cold, clinical dismissal. The world dissolved into a gray haze of pain. Every nascent hope, every budding feeling of self-worth withered and died. Of course, it had all been a game to him, a diversion. I was a crack in the floorboards he had briefly found interesting to examine. I had been a fool, a complete and utter fool, to believe otherwise. Tears I had not shed in years burned my eyes. "I know this is difficult, child," Anya said, placing a cool hand on my shoulder. "But do not despair. I have not been idle. I have been thinking of your future." She smiled, a thin, predatory curving of her lips. "I have arranged a match for you, Baron von Hesse. He is an older gentleman, a widower, but very wealthy. He is eager to have a bride to warm his hearth. It is all settled. You will be married within the fortnight." Baron von Hesse, a cruel, lecherous old man known for his foul temper and his collection of young, miserable wives, two of whom had already died under mysterious circumstances. It was not a marriage, it was a death sentence. It was my punishment for daring to reach for the sun. I wept. I fled to my room and collapsed onto my bed, the fake letter clutched in my hand, my body shaking with silent, racking sobs. I was trapped. He had cast me aside, and my stepmother was selling me to a monster. The cage I had lived in my entire life had just become infinitely smaller and infinitely more terrifying. The darkness I had known before was a comfort compared to this new, suffocating despair. 2 days passed in a blur of misery. I refused to eat. I refused to leave my room. I was a ghost again, but this time a truly haunted one. On the 3rd day, there was a commotion downstairs. Raised voices, my stepmother's, sharp and indignant, and then another, a low, calm baritone that cut through her screeching like a surgeon's scalpel. Alaric. My door burst open. It was Rosalind, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something I couldn't identify. "Elara, you have to come down. The Duke is here. He's demanding to see the entire family. Mama is furious." A cold dread washed over me. He had come to finalize my humiliation, to watch as I was handed over to another man. I could not face him. "I can't," I whispered. "You must," Rosalind insisted, her usual placidity gone. "Something is wrong. He looks dangerous." She pulled me from my bed, smoothed my dress, and practically dragged me down the stairs. The scene in the main drawing room was tense enough to shatter. The Duke stood by the fireplace, an immovable object. My stepmother stood opposite him, her face flushed with rage. My father hovered uselessly in the background. Alaric's eyes found me the moment I entered the room. The coldness was back, but it was different now. It was the absolute zero of deep space, a coldness that burned. It was the look of a man on the edge of a terrible, controlled fury. "There you are, Miss Elara," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Your stepmother has been telling me the most fascinating stories." He gestured to a small table beside him. On it lay 2 letters. One was the physician's report. The other was the cruel forgery I had been clutching for 2 days. "Lady Anya," he began, turning his glacial gaze upon her. "You have a talent for fiction, a truly remarkable imagination." Anya drew herself up. "I have no idea what you mean, Your Grace. I have only the welfare of my stepdaughter at heart. She is a troubled girl." "Is she?" The Duke picked up the physician's letter. "Dr. Albrecht, who penned this insightful diagnosis, is a man whose license was revoked 3 years ago for fraud. He is also a man to whom you paid the rather princely sum of 500 crowns yesterday morning. My bankers are quite meticulous." My stepmother went deathly pale. "And this," he continued, picking up the second letter, "is a rather clumsy attempt at my handwriting. The ink is inferior, and the forger has a tendency to press too hard on his downstrokes. A novice's mistake." He looked directly at me, and for a fleeting instant, the ice in his eyes thawed, replaced by something that looked like pained regret. "I would never, under any circumstances, write such words to you. I hope you know that." The floor seemed to sway beneath my feet. It was all a lie. The letter, the dismissal, it was all her. "And finally," the Duke said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more deadly, "we come to the matter of the Baron von Hesse." He took a step toward Anya, who involuntarily shrank back. "You attempted to sell your stepdaughter into a marriage with a man currently under investigation by my own magistrates for the murder of his second wife. A fact I'm sure you were unaware of." His tone made it clear he believed the opposite. "But perhaps your most egregious crime is not the attempted transaction of a human life, but a simple matter of theft." He produced a 3rd document from his coat pocket, a legal ledger. "When your first husband, Elara's father, married you, he was a widower of some means. When he died, he left a significant dowry in trust for his only daughter, Elara. A dowry to be managed by her new stepfather, Lord Evian, and administered upon her marriage or her coming of age. The funds, however, are gone, embezzled over the course of a decade to pay for dresses, jewels, and parties. To fund the ambitions of a grasping, cruel woman who would starve one child to fatten her own." My father made a strangled noise and sank into a chair, his face ashen. He had known. He had let her do it. "Lies, all of it." Anya shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You cannot prove any of this. It is the word of this pathetic, scheming girl against mine." "No," the Duke said calmly. "It is the word of my accountants, my investigators, and the Bank of the Realm against yours. It is over, Lady Anya." He had done this all for me. In the space of 2 days, he had uncovered every lie, every secret, every petty cruelty and grand theft. He had brought the entire corrupt edifice of my family crashing down. He turned to me, his expression softening. "Ilara," he said, using my name without a title for the first time. "She has no more power over you." And in that moment, something inside me broke free. It was not the dam of tears, but a dam of silence. 18 years of being unheard, of swallowing words, of accepting my own worthlessness, crumbled away. I looked at the woman who had tormented me, at the father who had failed to protect me, and I found my voice. "You were wrong about me," I said, and the words were clear and steady. They rang with a strength I never knew I possessed. "I am not a mouse. I am not a ghost. I am not delicate or troubled. I am a person, and you tried to erase me. You hid me in corners and dressed me in gray and told me I was nothing, hoping I would believe you. And I did. For so long, I did." I took a step forward, my gaze fixed on Anya's terrified face. But a mind cannot be erased. An idea cannot be hidden behind a tapestry forever. You thought his interest in me was a threat to you, but his only crime was that he saw me. He saw the person you tried so hard to bury, and that is what you could never forgive. I turned to my father. "And you stood by and watched, for peace, for an easy life. You sacrificed your own daughter for quiet evenings and a well-run household. I hope you find the silence you so desperately crave to be very lonely." Rosalind was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She looked at me with dawning horror and comprehension, as if seeing the last decade of our lives for the first time. I had said my piece. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Anya's ragged breathing. I felt strangely calm, emptied of all the old fear and resentment. I was free. Alaric came to my side. He did not touch me, but his presence was a warm, solid anchor in the wreckage. "Lord Evian," he said, his voice once again formal and cold, "your wife will be facing criminal charges. As for your stepdaughter, she will be coming with me. Her stolen dowry will be repaid, with interest, from my own accounts. She is under my protection now. If you or any member of your household ever attempts to contact her again without her express permission, you will find that my influence extends to every corner of this kingdom." He paused. "Are we clear?" My father, a broken man, could only nod. Alaric offered me his arm. I took it without hesitation. As we walked toward the door, leaving the ruins of my old life behind, I did not look back. He did not take me back to his townhouse. The carriage drove out of the city, toward the hills that overlooked the capital. We rode in a comfortable silence, the turmoil of the confrontation slowly receding. He had given me a space to breathe, to simply be. The carriage stopped at the crest of a high ridge, before a small stone building with a domed copper roof. An observatory. He led me inside. A magnificent brass telescope dominated the center of the circular room, aimed at the darkening sky. He walked to the large window, which framed a breathtaking view of the city lights beginning to twinkle below. "I had this built for Leo," he said softly. "We were meant to map the southern skies together. After he died, I could not bring myself to come here. Not until recently." He turned to face me, his severe features softened by the twilight. "You brought me back here, Ilara." My heart ached with an emotion so vast it had no name. "What was said in that room," he began, his voice low and earnest, "was about justice. This is about something else." He took a step closer. "I am not a man of easy words or grand romantic gestures. My world has been a quiet, ordered place for a very long time. And then you asked a question about the stars, and my universe tilted on its axis." He reached out and gently cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. His touch, was electric, 1,000 silent words passing between us. They tried to make you invisible, but you burn brighter than any star I have ever studied. I do not want to be your savior, Alara. I have no desire to rescue you. I want to be your partner, your anchor, your equal. I want to spend the rest of my life in conversation with you. His gray eyes, so often like winter ice, were now the color of a warm silver fog, full of a deep, staggering vulnerability. I see you, Alara Evian. I see all of you, and I am in love with you. He paused, his breath catching slightly. Will you marry me? The tears that came this time were not of sorrow or despair, but of a profound, shattering joy. It was a joy so immense it felt like pain, a cleansing fire that burned away the last remnants of the gray ghost I had once been. Yes, I whispered, the word a prayer, a promise. Yes, Alaric. He lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of profound certainty, of 1,000 conversations held and 1,000,000 more to come. It was the end of a long, cold winter and the impossible, brilliant beginning of the spring. It was the feeling of being, at long last, truly and completely seen. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of that same observatory, now our observatory, a warm cashmere shawl wrapped around my shoulders. The night was clear and cold, the stars scattered across the black velvet sky like diamond dust. Behind me, in the warm glow of the lamplight, Alaric was working, making a notation on a celestial chart we were creating together. My name was Alara Valerius now, Duchess of the Northern Reaches. The title felt strange, like a borrowed cloak, but the name Alara felt more my own than it ever had before. Lady Anya had been disgraced, her name a scandal whispered in the very drawing rooms she had so desperately sought to conquer. My father lived a quiet, solitary life in the country, a man haunted by his own weakness. Rosalind had written to me, a long, heartfelt letter of apology. We were slowly, cautiously, building a new kind of sisterhood, one based on truth instead of illusion. Alaric came to stand beside me, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. We looked out at the lights of the city, a mirror of the stars above. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into my hair. "I was thinking about the color of invisibility," I said softly. "I used to think it was gray, the color of dust and shadows and forgetting." He was silent for a moment, his arms tightening around me. "And now?" I leaned back against his solid warmth, my heart full and steady. "Now I know there is no such thing. There are only people who are not looking closely enough." I turned my head and kissed him, a quiet affirmation under the watchful eyes of 1,000,000,000 distant suns. I was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I was here. I was solid. I was seen. And I was loved.